Hello, and welcome to another episode of Spark Talk. Today we're picking up the thread from the last episode where we discussed the crisis in the left. And we're going to do this by taking up a recent publications of our comrades in the US who sent greetings to the Second National Congress of the RCA, that is the Revolutionary Communists of America. To discuss the what and the why of this, I've got with me the authors of the greetings, Edward and Lital. Welcome, comrades.
Hi.
Hi. So I guess the reason why I wanted to have you guys on is to have our listeners understand from you guys, why did you decide to do this and what exactly are the points that you guys wanted to communicate through your greetings? So I think I'd just like to jump right into it. Why did you guys feel the need to do this?
I mean, our greetings were not solicited greetings. We
Yes, fair enough.
Them. So I don't know if any other groups did, but I kind of doubt that.
All the more reason. Yeah, they were unsolicited. So why?
Yeah. Well, because, we knew they were having their Second National Congress, and we had read their document that they wrote for it, Where is America Going? Which is very similar to the title of a document we had at our own plenum last December that was called Where is the U.S. Going? So that piqued our interest. But, we've also intersected the RCA, at different events and protests and things like that. And they have a lot of, new and young people around them who, subjectively think they are and want to be revolutionaries. And, we thought that, and we also have heard from a number of them that they think that a lot of what we say sounds like what they say, or that
really?
Similar. And so we wrote these greetings to clarify what we agree on and what we disagree on and what we found to be a lot of contradictions in the document that they wrote. And, we think like this is in the general interest of, the necessity to have debate in the left on, which way forward in this period, but also based on the understanding that the situation under Trump right now really necessitates united front defense against the blows that are happening and coming. Mm-hmm. And so it was really in that spirit to engage them in that way that we wanted to write these greetings.
That sounds really, really necessary. I think trying to have those debates amongst the left. Just out of curiosity, have you guys got anything in return from these greetings?
Nothing official, as far as I'm aware.
What's the unofficial?
I got a little bit of feedback from a member of the RCA who had said, that they actually kind of agreed with a lot of what we were saying in our greetings to them. But beyond that, so far we haven't got any kind of official response. They did put out like a post-Congress statement, which is more or less kind of a response, although it's not. Okay. Yeah, it's in the sense that it's like it addresses some things that the actual Where is America Going document didn't, like the question of communist work in the trade unions, this whole question that we addressed in the greetings about the shift to the right, but nothing official as far as I know.
Okay. Cool. So I guess now that we know why we did this, we weren't just trying to be in their faces, but this is part of our understanding that there's a crisis in the left. We're in a shitty situation, need to have political clarity, but also build, to the extent possible, opportunities for united work in the left and fight for clarifying perspectives and ways to do that. Okay, so what is in those greetings? I know there's three specific things that we take up: the world situation, the labor movement, and Black liberation. Mm-hmm. So unless you guys prefer otherwise, let's just go right into these in turn and talk about, so what do we say? What do they say? What exactly, as you mentioned, Lital, what are the contradictions and what are the differences?
Yeah, we tried to focus on the key questions for the American Revolution. And we agree with the RCA that the main problem of our time is building revolutionary leadership based in the working class. But the question is, how do you do that? And that's really where we differ. And I think for us as Marxists, you have to really start with with the objective reality of what is happening. And on a superficial level, they can write, and they do write, that the liberal world order is unraveling and that there's a real shift going on, which Trump represents. But they deny that, decades of liberal rule has driven many working people to the right. And so they agree, and they'll say that many workers hate liberalism, which we know is true, but they deny, the consciousness that goes with that they basically present it as the opposite of what it is, that workers breaking from liberalism means that they're going towards communism. And they argue this in a context when the left is like totally irrelevant and all the struggles taking place. And there's this huge gulf between the left and the working class, which, if you do any work in the United States, you see that everywhere. Edward.
Yeah, I mean, I think it also, like, just sort of that denial of reality there colors everything they do in terms of their interventions, right? Because if your assumption is that the working class is moving right now in this period towards revolutionary consciousness, that it's rejected liberalism and to the left, then they draw from that the role of communists is basically to propagandize in the subway, and eventually the masses, now that they're in motion and have awakened, will just flock into the RCA, so you don't have to deal with things like intervening in the trade unions in a real sustained way to present leadership to the working class in its daily struggles, or addressing questions of special oppression and giving a communist angle and fighting for a revolutionary leadership in those struggles as well. It's just sort of an automatic process. And so they kind of see themselves as, like, I don't know, I was looking on Twitter today and like they were talking about how they were a point of reference. Like, this is how they see themselves. Like, we're a point of reference and the people will flock to us because, after all, consciousness is moving in the direction of communism right now, which is it's just kind of way out there politically.
Right. And I think there's obviously huge parallels in terms of how they operate in the US and here. But my understanding is that they look to the students more than they do to the workers. Now, I'm kind of curious, in light of what you've said about them seeing that the workers are turning to the left, like, what's stopping them from also trying to recruit workers, or what's the obstacles there, if that makes sense?
It's funny. I think the main problem is as they see it, is that they don't have 10,000 members, which is kind of a strange thing, given that they're much smaller organizations like our own who are actively intervening in some of these labor struggles right now. And I think the way that they phrase it in their Where is America Going document is basically that, they talk about the betrayals of the trade union bureaucracy, like Sean Fain, Sean O'Brien, like supporting Trump's tariffs, all of these things. And sort of their answer to this is like, well, eventually these labor leaders we push toward class independence are pushed out because the workers won't have an alternative, which really, in the grand scheme of things, is like a recipe to try and pressure these labor leaders to the left or wait for the working class to conclude it needs communism, which it's already kind of confusing because they're saying everyone's moving toward communism, but they also, it's very contradictory, right? Because maybe contradictory isn't the right word. Maybe it's just very confused, right? Because the reality is, if there's any kind of radicalization, it's among the petty bourgeoisie who are in the universities and everything, who've been dependent on this liberal world order that is collapsing all around them right now. And that's mainly who RCA is recruiting out of. But they're not putting forward any kind of strategy in the labor movement right now because they have this automatic, spontaneous view of how things are going to automatically develop and push the labor leaders to either declare themselves independent of the Democratic Party or it's just going to happen,
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of interesting because Edward had mentioned this before, but so they did an article on their Congress after it happened, and they had a section on their trade union points, and they say how they approved some resolution on communists and the trade unions, but I don't know what the resolution was. But they say that many new comrades have asked about this, like what to do with the trade unions. And so they say, in it, the unions cannot be turned into fighting organizations without a serious strategy. The RCA aspires to become a point of reference for class struggle politics, including in the unions. To achieve that, our immediate priority must be recruit and train solid Marxist cadres from among radicalized youth, which will give us the basis to build organized teams of communists in the unions in the coming years. So it's kind of a caricature because it's like, okay, so you recognize that there needs to be a leadership that has a serious strategy to turn the unions into fighting organizations. But you're going to sit that out the next few years and read Marxist theory. It's really that's not, these are important years right now to actually get in and try to, change the direction. But it's very contradictory because, again, if you think that the workers are already going in that direction of communism and all you need to do is wave a flag and whatever, then it'll happen too, which is also what they argue. So, but I'm sure for, a number of younger people around them, they want to get into the, go into the unions and actually organize inside the class,
Interesting. There's some parallels here with my experience here in Britain. I did want to just drive home the point that in either case, whether you quote build a party now and then once you've got, steeled Marxist cadre, then you throw them in the labor movement. Well, guess what? You're capitulating right now. You're letting the existing rotten people in charge of the struggles. Like as Lital, you said, these are pretty important years. You got Trump, you got LA up in flames. Labor movement needs to be out right now. These are years where the working class is going to be totally battered unless, guess what? The left, the socialists give leadership to these struggles and actually put forward a strategy wherever they are to defend the working class. So that's just an open capitulation, and that's not really fighting for leadership.
Yeah, I mean, like in their document, maybe this was in their report on their Congress. They talk about how they, delegates covered all these topics on austerity, political significance of events like the 2020 George Floyd uprising, the self-immolation of Aaron Bushnell, and the widespread sympathy for Luigi Mangione. Everywhere we look, we see symptoms of the molecular process of revolution developing in the U.S. society. Yeah. And it's like none of these examples are
Aaron Bushnell is not an example.
Yeah, so it's like, or like what happened? What is the reality of the Floyd movement 5 years after? Like the movement didn't accomplish anything really, and no one is talking about the Black struggle and the struggle against racist cop terror. So they give these examples of defeats and despairing actions to argue that revolution is coming. I mean, it must be very disorienting for the people,
But I think this links back to them looking to the student layers instead of the working class, because I think if you went up to, some worker in the Midwest right now and started explaining all this, they would look at your face like, what are you saying? What are you talking about? That this kind of stuff flies on liberal campuses, but this does not intersect where the working class is at right now. So we've been talking about trade unions, but we wanted to start talking about the world situation. So you mentioned at the outset, like, okay, the collapse of the liberal world order, but they're drawing the wrong conclusions, right? They're, instead of recognizing that the wind is really in the sails of the right wing, they're kind of just saying, well, okay, people are just going to start looking to communism. Right. That's one of the key differences we have.
Yeah, that what's posed right now is like an offensive situation, not a defensive one.
Okay, cool. And then I guess we've been touching on the labor movement as well. Is there anything else you wanted to add on that point itself specifically?
One thing I was thinking, just for the RCAers who might be listening or interested in these greetings, there's always this constant refrain in conversations I've had with members of the RCA who, when I've talked to them about our particular interventions around labor, whether it was the strike at Boeing or the ILA strike or the UAW strike, sometimes the best response I'll get is, we would love to do that, but right now we have to become cadre, which is a baffling statement given that you are never going to become a steeled Marxist cadre simply by reading books and having discussions about like capital in an office somewhere away from the actual lines of the struggle. That's just one thing I would want to impart to anybody in the RCA. It's like, this is how you actually build a party, is by intervening in these struggles and trying to provide leadership to them. So I just thought that was a useful point to convey.
I think also, because they're very, they put out reading lists and everybody should read Trotsky and Marx, whatever. But if you actually read Marx and Trotsky and Lenin, it's really the opposite of what they're saying to do right now. So I was reading this thing from Trotsky on the United Front for Defense. It was a letter to a social democratic worker from 1933. And, it's about Germany. And he's like, the German proletariat is in a situation where it is retreating and giving up its positions. To be sure, there is no lack of windbags to cry that we are allegedly in the presence of a revolutionary offensive. These are people who obviously do not know how to distinguish their right from their left. There is no doubt that the hour of the offensive will strike. But today, the problem is to arrest the disorderly retreat and to proceed to the regrouping of the forces for the defensive. In politics, as in military art, to understand a problem clearly is to facilitate its solution. To get intoxicated by phrases is to help the adversary. And I think that really captures, what
My God, that is that is such a fitting quote.
Yeah.
is quite a fitting quote. I am really glad you brought up both those things. Edward, what you were saying, it really reminded me, I think a theme that does come up in discussions with the RCI people is the whole theme of how to build a party, right? They do really see it as a stages thing, like recruit enough people, become Marxist through books, and then you go out and you do things. It's a very stagist, just a formalistic approach to building a party, whereas I appreciate what you said about how are you going to build a party is if you're actually intervening in the struggles, providing actual strategy to defend workers on the job, advance their interests on the job through struggle, and during strikes, whatever. And in that process, not only are you actually becoming steeled in the struggle, but you're winning workers to the banner of communism, actually. But you're doing it in the concrete, right? But I think they see it quite in a formalist, almost academic way of we got to just recruit, study, and then we'll become the Communist Party. And I think because so many of their members come from within the student milieu, this jives with the academic nature of their backgrounds, But this is really just not how you build a revolutionary party. So I appreciated what you had to say about that. So obviously you said that this letter is motivated by trying to draw some lines and push some clarity on the key questions for the American Revolution. Now we have to obviously talk about the Black question for the American Revolution. So what did the letter have to say, or your greetings have to say on this question?
Yeah, so we wanted to respond to the RCA on the Black question because it is the central question of the American Revolution. And for the RCA, their Where is America Going document has one little section dealing with this question, and it's mainly under the heading of identity politics, where they basically argue that old sort of economistic black and white unite and fight, like we just have to have sort of unity around like economic issues, and that identity politics is just this completely reactionary thing. And basically they have no real arguments to like anybody who would be affected by special oppression. If you're facing special oppression in the United States, like Black oppression in particular, and you read the RCA's thing about identity politics is reactionary, and you should just unite with the white and Latino workers and fight together for basically your economic demands. You don't really answer the arguments of the people who are advocating identity politics, who all day can actually talk about Black oppression because it's a real thing. Like it's a real thing that affects all Black people, regardless of whether or not they're in the working class, the middle class, whatever. And so we wanted to address that here because, this really doesn't do anything to break down the real live racial divisions within the American working class and unite the American working class across the racial line. It's struggling for higher wages, better hours, whatever, is not actually going to do that, right? You actually have to combine that fight with an understanding that you have to fight to end the special oppression of Black people. You have to fight against segregation. So we talk about like what we motivated during the UAW strike with calling to fight for Black liberation there, because this is sort of is an essential question to actually uniting the class, right? Which the RCA doesn't really have an answer to do here.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny because when you read their thing, they do recognize the hypocritical and pernicious role of liberalism. And they have this long, nice quote from Malcolm X on white liberalism and what it is, but they have nothing to offer to the people that advocate identity politics other than like they literally all they say is class unity.
Right.
And they basically deny that the class is divided, which anyone who does any work in the class, in the unions, whatever, knows this very vividly. And in particular, of course, Black workers, immigrant workers are very aware of these divisions in the class. And if you just ignore it, or even more, there's an implication that if you talk about it, it's divisive,
right.
Which is totally like the economist, what the economist trade union leadership does. But, so they never say that workers have a vested interest in actively fighting against Black oppression. And so if you don't talk about it and you don't fight to get workers to understand why it's in their material interest to fight against this thing that is being used to bring the whole class down, that just keeps those divisions in place, And I think it's connected to the earlier point about they recognize that a lot of workers supported Trump. but they deny that there's any support to his reactionary politics behind that, you know?
Right.
Where that's a big thing. Trump's anti-immigrant bigotry has a lot of sway in the class.
Right.
Mhm.
And, and it's a key way that the class is divided, between immigrants and native born workers. And so they won't touch that, though, because that kind of ruins the narrative that, yes, workers voted for Trump, but they're going towards communism.
Right.
It's not reactionary. Like we've intersected on various picket lines, Boeing. There's been a number of military producing strikes, whatever. And, you'll intersect a number of very militant pro-union workers who are also Trump supporters.
Right.
And you have to actually make arguments that show that to actually defend the unions, you have to defend immigrants, because that's a contradiction with these workers. And so if you just, okay, we're not going to talk about that, you're not actually going to be able to defend the unions. And so I think that's a big problem they have, because they just have to deny reality about the consciousness of the class, because otherwise it's not the offensive or whatever,
Yeah.
Go on.
I was just going to say this, denying this, in a sense, it's capitulating to this rightward shift in society right now, not having any kind of answer to break these barriers down. I mean, you leave the working class in the hands of these trade union bureaucrats who are more than willing to cut deals with Trump. And the other day, I don't know if anyone saw it, but the other day, the Teamsters head was weighing in on the big Trump-Elon breakup to encourage everyone to support Trump in the breakup.
Oh my God.
And it really is. It just kind of leaves people in that. And then on the other hand, the sections of society that are especially oppressed, whether it's Black people or immigrant workers, are just left in the hands of these toothless advocates of identity politics who are in bed with these white liberals who betray them every single time when they moved into struggle, And so really the RCA's perspective doesn't do anything to break those down, and just kind of perpetuates the situation as it is.
Yeah, I mean, I think as you guys were explaining this, what really comes to my mind is it's a broader problem of how the RCI in general approaches politics. So whether you're calling for class unity on the shop floor or whatever, not recognizing that, for example, I don't know, in the East Coast docks, longshore, sorry, that there's literally segregated local, right?
Yeah.
And where Black workers themselves are no, we want to stay in our Black local. We're fine with this situation. It's okay, you're just going to go wave your red flag and say class unity. It's fundamentally similar to what they do in general, which is, there's a crisis of capitalism. You got to fight for revolution. It's you're exploited equally. So let's unite. Okay, there's a crisis. Let's fight for revolution. But what that does is there's a giant gap between where things are at right now and all the millions of obstacles that exist to building that class unity. How are you going to build bridges of trust between Black and white workers, between pro-Trump workers who need to be won over away from Trump, right? And to the working class perspective. How are you going to fight for revolution when right now, as we've been talking about, this is not really where the working class is at, when they are led by all kinds of misleaders. So I think overall, it brings to mind the approach of just kind of saying things that abstractly sound good and are correct. We are for class unity, but the problem is, how are you going to build it? Right? Because it doesn't just exist. There's all manner of divisions, of course, along racial lines, along the lines of gender, etc. But even craft, you got different workers doing different jobs in the same factory or same shop floor, and they're not united because they're confronting different things and so on. So it's how are you going to build this? So it's a nice thing, we're with you, build class unity, but how? And I think that's fundamentally the answer that comrades of the RCI are not able to answer. And I think it comes full circle because they already think, workers are moving to the left. They don't need to be explained all this. So we'll just onwards and upwards. But it's how are you going to do this? And I think it's the how that to me is really the big giant gaping hole in the RCA's whatever cool flashy thing that they've got going on.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of Black workers and activists and whatever have this thing that the Marxist left is just about class.
Yeah.
It doesn't want, And it's true when you do it like the RCA and these groups, because it's literally what they're saying is that this is not a key question. And when it's the key question in the US, based on the whole history of this country and how the ruling class has used it very consciously to keep the whole class down. And so it's really like a very obvious thing, like when you read the section on identity politics, that they like literally have nothing to offer Black people and other oppressed, especially oppressed groups. I mean, this is like a side thing, but they don't even mention the word woman once in this like 80-page document, which is like pretty
it's irrelevant,
stark to say the least. But they're of course going to be fight for abortion and whatever, but they don't actually have any actual program for how you're going to achieve women's liberation or Black liberation.
Interesting. I'm just having a look at the greetings, and we put forward basically, look, this is what we're doing when it comes to rebuilding the movement against police brutality and rebuilding the movement for Black liberation. And I'm referring here obviously to our campaign to open all police archives. And you make this push. I just want to maybe start wrapping up by talking a little bit about a concrete way that this could be done, so that if there is an RCA listening, and then they could maybe get a bit of a sense of what we're getting at.
Yeah, I mean, the Open the Police Archives campaign, this is a campaign we're building right now to try and rebuild the movement against cop terror, because that movement was betrayed by the liberals. And what we want to do with this campaign is actually rebuild it on a solid revolutionary foundation, exposing the capitalist politicians who pretend to be friends of Black people, working people, by saying, all right, open up the files. Let's see what's in the state secrets, right? And this seems like a demand RCA could completely join in with us on. I mean, after all, I'm pretty sure they say open the books somewhere or another with all of their other demands, right? And it would be a real way to both engage in common defensive work and push forward a struggle that needs to happen right now and break down these racial barriers in the U.S.
Yeah, desperately needs to happen. I mean, cop terror hasn't stopped.
Right.
But what's really heartbreaking actually is where the movement's at. It is so urgent to rebuild that. And the logic is actually very simple. Okay, you guys say you're for it. Fine. But let's put you on the spot. Open the archives. You can do it, right? There's nothing stopping you. It's literally your archives.
Right.
Open them. And when they don't, then what that does is, in the minds of, our aim with that is that in the minds of Black folks who might look to these liberal politicians, they'll see, okay, well, this person's not doing something that obviously sounds commonsensical and would be good for the fight against cop terror, but they're not doing it. Oh, maybe they're not on our side. Maybe we need to look for a different strategy. It's very basic, but you got to recognize the state of things and go from there and try and push that forward, but in opposition to all the giant obstacles that stand in the way. So that's what we're doing. And I do think that was really nice that you guys put that out there. Join us, build this. It would be a really concrete way to actually build your party.
Yeah.
Right.
They reference the George Floyd movement all the time in their documents, articles, whatever, that it, shook the world. And in this document that we're responding to, they say that since then, there's been no movements or strikes even approximating that scale, which is true. But that they say that eventually we will face a tsunami of class struggle, and that's why we have to prepare for it. And it's like, well, the question of racist cop terror has not gotten better since the BLM movement. It's gotten worse, and it's more rampant than ever. And so why would they just sit around? They understand that that's a thing that you should fight. Mm-hmm. And, and also it's kind of the point too about liberalism, right? Because it's been totally abandoned. And they recognize that on one hand. That's the thing about the contradictions, is they recognize that the liberals have washed their hands of this, and that the liberal basis was just totally hypocritical. Identity politics based, whatever. But then again, it always comes back to, well, how do you fight this? And what do you do now? And I think that's why we posed it, because they'll have signs like fight Trump, fight and the liberals. And we're like, okay, good, cool. It's good you say that. But how do you do that? And then whenever they write about the BLM movement, they basically just present it as the problem was it was just a spontaneous explosion of anger, as though there were no politics or program behind it. And that's like pretty consistent what they do with it. And so again, it's this contradiction. It's like you can abstractly talk about liberalism and how it's not really against racist oppression, but then you don't actually take on the liberal obstacles, which was the main obstacle concretely with this movement. Whereas our call for opening the police archives is really that when push comes to shove, the liberals are not
True
on the
colors come
side
out. Yeah.
of Black people. And there's a real need for this. I mean, like in our work, there's just so many cases of police killings all over the country that, no one is doing anything about it. I mean, so that it's a very really felt need, to for this campaign. So I don't know. We'll see. We have not heard anything back from them regarding joining this campaign.
We will. Right.
Yeah, but I think for those around them, youth and whatever who do want to fight this and want to, who might have become animated around the Floyd uprising, like would be thinking like, what can we do now, as opposed to just waiting around for the next tsunami or whatever to come.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. Well, I think we've covered the three main things that you guys touched on in your greetings. Is there anything else that you guys wanted to say, maybe to the lone RCA who could be listening to this when it's eventually published?
I guess I would just say that it's good if they're going to read Trotsky and Marx and Lenin.
Nothing against books. Love books.
It's good, but I guess to really try. This is speaking from somebody, our organization, we spent a lot of time reading a lot of these works without actually applying them to the real world, concrete, what is happening and what to do about it. And so I feel like it would be really good for them to read this stuff not as abstract theory, but actually as guides, in different periods, how to actually organize, the working class. And in this period, the question of organizing for, its defense is definitely not an abstract question. It's very real, and things are already now starting and going to get much worse. And, what they're pushing is going to basically just going to burn people out, because, it's not going to work. So, so I just, if for anyone who has doubts about any of it, I would just encourage them to, to seriously read, these Marxist works, but also try to actually read them in how they would apply today.
For sure.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a whole lot else. I was just going to make a pitch for the RCAers who might be listening to also check out the other letter that we sent on United Class Struggle Defense to Free Political Prisoners in Pakistan, of which some of their members, which is really important as well.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks. Sorry, I just wanted to pick up on one thing you said, Lital, which is, demoralization, the risk of it amongst their own ranks, because I get it, somebody's really hyped up, energized, and they want to become a communist. That's great. But consciousness changes. And if you kind of see, things are not really changing for the better, etc., we don't have a revolution. It would be a bad outcome if members of the RCI anywhere start to quit and be demoralized. That is a bad outcome, not just for them, but for the left. We don't want people turning away from the left. That is a bad thing. So it's actually, again, to consolidate their own ranks. Unsolicited advice, but to consolidate their own ranks, to build their own party, what they need to be doing is actually intervening into the struggles, but actually doing it in the concrete, providing answers. And I think that's, like I said, that's a big gaping hole in their perspectives that lacks. So on that note, I think we can wrap up. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. I just wanted to, I guess last thing to say, we talked about the why you did it, what it was. And I think to the RCAers, the ball's in your court and answer some hows. How are you going to do this? And I guess to our listeners, to our regulars, I'd just like to say, I think this was a bit of a different episode in that it really focused in on something quite specific. We've not really done an episode on a specific organization, but I think I would, I think the relevance here is the necessity of trying to fight for political clarity within the left, because again, that's one of the tasks that revolutionaries have to take up in this period of weakness and disarray. So on that note, I'll say goodbye. Thank you, comrades, for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Alrighty. Okay. Bye.